Hi guys, Michael here again, welcome back. This is the second part of the tutorial on how to do a pushable box in UDK. If you've watched the first episode, you would have seen me demonstrate how to set up the Kismet nodes to enable a box or any asset, any interpact to move across a horizontal plane. In this episode, in this scene, what I've done is I've moved the box up onto the platform up here and placed two trigger volumes in front of the ledge and one at the bottom. So I'll talk a bit more about those shortly. If I go into wireframe mode, you'll also see a box in here. This box is an exact replica of the one up top. The only difference is this is actually a kActor instead. So instead of it being an interpact, this is a kActor. So the whole sort of concept here is using the kActor and swapping it out with the interpactor to make it fall off the ledge. First thing I want to talk about is the actual settings within the kActor itself. I have damage applies impulse. This isn't a necessity, of course. You can have that turned off if you wish. It's probably best you have it turned off, especially if you have weapons, which I'll talk about more later on. I also have a wake on level start. This just means that when the level starts, the physics are applied to the box straight away. If this is not ticked, what will happen is the box won't have any physics until some impulse is applied to the box. So yeah, the next thing I've done is I've enabled the stay upright spring, and what this does is, using the variables underneath, it will attempt to keep the box in the position it's in. So it keeps it upright. This can be useful for quite a lot of things, such as when you have something fall, obviously you want the heavier end to fall down. It can be used for things like that. This in itself is something that it's probably best you just sort of play with, adjust with, see what feels right, what looks right. For this example, I found that these settings here work quite well. The next thing I want to talk about is the collision. The collision on the kActor in itself is quite important. When you set up the collision on the box, all the settings, of course, will be the default. And one of the settings that will be ticked is this no encroach check. You want to make sure this is unticked. What this no encroach check does is it makes it so that the box will not trigger any triggers, won't activate any. And of course, because we're going to be using it to triggers, we want to ensure that that is unticked so it can allow it to do that. This also applies to interpactors. So if you ever want interpactors to trigger a trigger, you also have to make sure that they are also on no encroach check. Right, so the next thing I want to talk about is the volumes themselves. When you place a trigger volume, there are quite a lot of settings that you can play with. In most cases, you want to leave these at default. In this example, I have it at default. There are certain things here, such as process all actors. There are certain actors in the game that by default this trigger volume will not trigger, will not activate when certain assets enter them. In this scenario, it does work with kActors, hence why it's not ticked. And that's exactly the same for the trigger underneath. So I'm going to start off and just demonstrate the box falling. So it's going to run at the top. So obviously, as before, you can walk into the box and it pushes. And once it touches the first trigger volume, swaps it out for a kActor and falls down. And then once it hits the trigger volume at the bottom, it then swaps it back out to the interpactor, which can then be moved and placed again, well, pushed again. Okay, so the Kismet. Surprisingly, there is actually very little that you need to actually add to make the box fall, simply because all the physics side of things is actually handled by the kActor. So all we're doing is swapping the interpactor with the kActor. Of course, remembering that everything involved with the box, such as the triggers and the dynamic trigger volumes, are all attached. So when you move the box, obviously these attachments will also move with it. So the first thing I've started off by doing is adding obviously the triggers into the Kismet. As for the touch types, these are different. By default, in the touch types of the triggers, these will be set to pawn. In this scenario, the top one, we only want to get triggered when it gets touched by an interpactor. So when the box, the interpactor at the top touches it, it then triggers in what we have here as a remote event. Also on the trigger, I also have player only unchecked, which I talked about in the first episode, and I've just set the max trigger count to 0 with a slight delay. From here, I then use an instigator, which I've named Falling Box Instigator. Pretty simple. So I'll talk a bit more about how we use that very shortly. So from here, it then goes into an activate remote event, which just triggers this remote event down here. So you can add remote events, simply new action, event, activate remote event, and it'll give you a box. And by default, it'll have a cross in it because it's not linked up to anything. So when you go into the settings where it says event name, if you give it a name, so I'll do a little scenario here. So if we call this event underscore 01, it'll change the name inside the remote event, as you can see here. If I then wanted to obviously use this event, I can then go to new event, and there is a remote event, and unfortunately it's just off the screen. So it's on a new event, and it's called remote event. So if you click that, it will add a very similar thing to what you would get if you was to place a trigger, and you get exactly the same settings as you would in a trigger, such as max trigger count and your delays and things like that. But before this trigger here will link with this one, you also need to give this a name, and you want it to be exactly the same as what you have for your remote event. So in this case, if I give it the name event underscore 01, you'll notice it then has a tick. This shows that it is then linked up, but of course you'll notice that there's a little X here which shows that it's not linked up. Unfortunately, this seems to be an issue where it doesn't update it. If you close the Kismet window and relaunch it, it then has the tick. So sometimes if it looks like it's not been synced up, close the Kismet window and relaunch it and just double check. Right, so I'm just going to delete those. For the trigger volume that's on the floor, I have exactly the same settings as I do for the one up above. The only difference is, for the touch types, I have this set to kActor. The reason it's set as a kActor is because I want to then, it's going to be the kActor when it hits the floor that then needs to be swapped back out with the interpactor. We'll then also have I then use another instigator. This is just named Falling Box Instigator 2. This comes out onto another remote event called box swap underscore 02. Okay, so the next thing we do, following from the remote event, we have a toggle. And what this toggle does is this simply just disables the movement of the interpactor. And the way it does this is by setting the collision of the box, the detection triggers that we set up in the first episode, and sets them to true. This means that the box itself will not move. I'll demonstrate later what would happen if this isn't here and what can happen. From here it then goes into a get location and rotation, which we used in the first episode to get the location of the box, of course. But what we use it for this time is we get the location and the rotation, well, just the location of the kActor, because we want to know where the kActor is, so we can then set the actor location of the interp actor to the location of the kActor. From here it then goes into a teleport, and the reason why we have a teleport is because to move a kActor you either have to apply a force using force volumes or other various types of things, or you have to teleport it. Unfortunately the set actor location doesn't apply to a kActor, so we have to use the teleport. And the way we do this is set the target, so in this case the kActor, and the destination. And what we have here is we simply use the instigator, so falling box instigator. So when the interp actor touches this, it places the interp actor into the object node, the object variable even, which is then used over here. So it will always teleport the kActor to the whatever touched the trigger volume. This then goes into a set actor location, and this simply uses the location of the kActor and the falling box instigator. So it takes the location of the interp actor at the top as a target, so the instigator, and sets its location to what is the kActor over here. What we then have for the box swap 2, so this is the trigger on the floor, it's near enough exactly the same setup. The only difference is for the toggles, we have this so it turns them off, which then allows the boxes to then move again. We have a similar concept here, but we have instead a falling box instigator 2, which we're using as our target, because we want to then get the location of where the box is, where the kActor is on the floor. Yeah, and we get the location, which is also named as box swap location 2. From here we then go into another teleport, and this simply takes the falling box instigator, which is the interp actor, so what swapped at the top, and swaps with whatever then hits the bottom, in this case the kActor. So that's how the kActor then gets re-swapped back out with the interp actor. From here it then simply goes back into another set actor location, just like the first one, and just swaps the location of the interp actor to the location of the kActor. And that is how it works in terms of the Kismet code. Very, very simple. So yes, I'm going to quickly show you what happens if you don't have the toggle at the beginning to disable the collision. So I've just broke the links and then just connected it straight, bypassing the toggle. So what can happen here, it doesn't always happen, but the box in itself will continue to move and it will appear like a duplicate. As you can see in that scenario, that didn't happen. Let me just reboot and see if we can get it to happen. Nope, it's not wanting to happen. But trust me, it's required. Well, it's not, but it's a way to help prevent problems from occurring. So yeah, another thing I want to obviously talk to you about is the actual positioning of this top trigger volume. I have it set here because this is the furthest, well, the closest away it can be, well, the closest it can be to this edge and still allow the box to then fall. If I was to move it closer, like this, the kActor wouldn't be overhanging the edge enough, and thus therefore it wouldn't fall off. If it's too far over, the box, it won't sort of roll off, it would just drop. In some games, some mechanics, you might want that as a visual indicator, but in this scenario I wanted it to have that sort of roll effect. So yes, that is how you create a pushable box, a fall box in UDK using Kismet. Hope this helps. Hope you've learnt how to use remote events and the power of swapping boxes out, assets out. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.